On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. The leader of the DUP says changes to post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland are a positive and decisive step. A deal with the UK government will see checks on goods moving across the Irish Sea, but checks on those remaining in the UK being scrapped. But some within the party, like the MP Sammy Wilson, still have questions.
When I look out my bedroom window in the morning, I see an EU-manned border post being built down in the port of Larne beside me. That's evidence that there's a border driven down through the middle of the country in which I belong to.
The United States says the weekend drone attack, which killed 3 US service personnel in Jordan, was carried out by a group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. It's being described as an umbrella group of militias which are backed by Iran. Scotland's First Minister has told the COVID inquiry she regrets the first lockdown didn't happen sooner. While giving evidence, Nicola Sturgeon also said a large part of her wishes she wasn't in the job during the pandemic. And the deadline for owners of XL bully dogs to apply to keep their pets has passed this evening. Certificates for exemption were being made available ahead of a ban on the breed coming into force in England and Wales tomorrow. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 35 points at 76.30. The pound will buy $1.27 and €1.17. LBC weather, rain moving southwards across the south of England and Wales overnight, with blustery showers in the far north and an overnight low of freezing. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
It's 8 on LBC. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel tonight, to my left, Rachel Johnson, LBC presenter and host of the Global Player podcast, Difficult Women, where she interviews a difficult woman every week. She's never invited me onto the podcast, don't know why. Robbie Moore is next to her, Conservative Environment Minister and MP for Keighley. Barry Gardiner is to my right, Labour MP for Brent North, former Shadow Cabinet Minister, and our old friend Michael Crick, political journalist and author. They are here to answer your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Now, a week of Cross Questions would not be complete without a call from Chris in Richmond. Does he phone your programme, Rachel?
Oh, I think he does. I definitely have someone in Richmond.
I'm sure you do. Chris, are you Rachel's someone in Richmond?
It could be. My daughter's also spoken to her as well, so it's a family thing.
There you go. All right, enough of this.
Good evening,
What's your
panel.
question?
Good evening, Ian. Yes, so does this sound or the sight of Conservative MPs laughing at questions and comments about an Iceland worker's mortgage rate somewhat what's wrong with this government and why it's quite so unpopular at the moment?
Barry Gardiner, you were at PMQs today. Could you give us an impartial analysis of, or just give us the background to what Chris's question is referring to?
Yes. Sir Keir Starmer referred to a government minister, who I won't name, who said that he was stepping down because...
George Freeman. I thought I'd do it for you.
Well, I was trying not to be partisan. Said that he was stepping down because he could no longer afford his mortgage. The point that Sir Keir was making was that obviously if somebody on such a high salary as George was unable to afford their mortgage, then that just showed how much somebody like Phil in Iceland was struggling, and so many people as well, because of course this is the time when the fixed rate mortgages are running out, and many people are finding that their mortgages have increased by several hundred, if not £1,000 a month. So I think it was an important moment. I personally, I don't like making personal attacks in that way, but I thought that the point was an important one about the way in which the the increase in the mortgage rate is affecting people in this country, and the real pain that it's causing. So I thought that was a fair political point. The idea that people should have laughed at somebody in such a predicament, I think, is, well, despicable.
I mean, it was news to me that George Freeman sort of resigned. I thought he was sacked, Michael Crick.
I've lost track of George Freeman's career. He's one of these ministers that has been in and out of government on so many occasions, generally holding the same job that he held before. It's impossible to keep up. I mean, it was a bit... as soon as I heard the news about George Freeman, I thought, don't do it now. Leave it till the election. It's only a few months away. Surely you can afford the mortgage in the meantime, because it's going to look really bad for your party. And sure enough, Labour have gone on the offensive. I mean, you would have thought by now, though, that MPs, 35 years it is, or roughly, since the Commons has been televised, you would have thought that MPs would learn that if they laugh, those laughs can be misinterpreted. And, I mean, really, I suppose they were laughing at Starmer, weren't they? I don't know. But I wasn't there. But it's done them no good, and they should have behaved themselves.
And I'm sure, Robbie Moore, you were behaving yourself.
Of course. But I think the point that was being made here is... that we need to recognise is the amount of support that the government is delivering for many working families, many businesses across the country. We have gone through a very difficult time 2.5 years ago out of the back of the pandemic. A huge amount of support was given during that period that I think everyone would recognise sat around the table here to many families, businesses, households, and we've continued with recognising the challenges that those households are facing, and that's why through increase in utility bills and also through the increase in rates with mortgages, which is why we've taken action on the back of that.
But Phil in Iceland, or Phil from Iceland, no, I think Phil works for Iceland. Don't laugh, Michael, you'll get yourself into trouble.
Yep.
Phil in Iceland clearly doesn't appreciate that enough.
But the measures that we're putting in place as a government through the cost of living support payments, whether that's through the energy price guarantee, through provisions within universal credit, through provisions through the mortgage charter that was announced last year, are all designed to help those that are transitioning
Robbie,
through...
It's hardly helping people to say you can extend your mortgage from a 25-year mortgage to a 14-year mortgage.
It is helping people, though, because it means they pay less.
Well, no, it means that they pay more over a longer period of time. So in each month they'll pay
Cash flow
less.
is king.
Yeah, well, no, cash flow isn't. If you're being bound, basically a mortgage is something that most people like to get rid of. They celebrate when they've concluded their mortgage. The idea that Britain is now a democracy in which, a property-owning democracy, as the Prime Minister wanted it to be, in which so many people are going to be shackled to a mortgage for 40 years of their working life, is really quite horrendous.
But the mortgage charter was designed specifically to reduce those monthly payments that an individual would be having to make, and I think that's a good step that the government have instigated through that, to reduce that burden on a household through their monthly payments, not only for mortgage, but giving them more of a freedom to spend money
Robbie,
on
I understand
other
that.
items.
So they're trying to fix a problem, and what I'm saying is, ultimately, it would be better to get rid of the problem than to have a fix that's actually locking people in for 40 years.
Rachel?
Well, I'm slightly lost on this because I was in the House in the parliamentary estate, but I was at a different thing, and MPs were leaving to go to hear PMQs. I'll just mention quickly what it was. It's very important. It was Sheryl Sandberg and Schreiber talking about October the 7th and how nobody is talking about rape as a war crime enough. So I just want to put that out there. I have put something on my social media about it. I'm not sure, was Rishi laughing at the fact that George Freeman was claiming that he couldn't carry on as a Tory MP because his mortgage was too high? I mean, that is a laughable suggestion for a former minister to make, when it's obviously he is just taking advantage of the chicken run. He doesn't have to contest his seat and lose it.
Is he standing down?
I think he's standing... I think he's just leaving the job as a minister, not as a...
He's not actually surrendering his seat.
No.
So he is going to fight his seat.
He basically wants to get a better paid outside job, I think, from being a minister.
I see. Well, I mean, I think that's laughable. I think we should be looking at that and the fact that he's, blowing up a former Tory Prime Minister's tenure as he did so. I don't think it's particularly elegant or graceful as when it comes to his dismount. As for Phil, I mean, this, if he was laughing at Phil in Iceland, that is reprehensible. And it seems to me one of Rishi's kind of default reactions when he's confronted by evidence from the public, such as that the mother of the nurse 2 weeks ago, when he laughed when she told him.
No, but that was edited footage. And
he didn't laugh then.
I think one of his aides was trying to sort of get him into the building because he obviously had to get in there.
Is, they can't
and he continued the conversation with the woman quite amicably as he walked into the building. But Sky News edited it, so it seemed very different.
Let me just end with not a pejorative remark about politicians, which is you were talking earlier in the show about whether it was okay, or we're going to talk about it later, or you are, whether Nicola Sturgeon should have cried. Well, whether they laugh or whether they cry,
we might have a question on that later.
They still get flack. They can't do anything right at this point.
Michael, do you think that, I mean, I think that is a valid point, and I think it's putting off a lot of people going into politics, this sort of thing where, well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so why bother in the first place? Do you run this marvellous Twitter feed about who all the new candidates are across party throughout the country. Do you notice a difference in the type of candidates that are being selected now?
I certainly think there are...
Why are you laughing, Barry?
Because I read his Twitter feed.
Okay.
Well, there are a lot fewer people coming forward to be candidates, and I think the quality is going down. And I think there's a whole range of reasons, but two reasons pertinent to this are the silly banter and attacks that you see in the House of Commons at regular intervals, but also, and I know this is an unpopular view, I do think that MPs are badly paid compared with what we should be paying them if we're going to get really high calibre people, and that probably applies to ministers too. So I sympathise with George Freeman in that respect. I just think tactically he should have left it until the election, and he, I think he has been a good minister and is a good politician, and science is his specialism, which presumably will mean it'll be quite easy to get a well-paid
job.
Now
apparently he's angling for a knighthood. Do you see that story today? That he'd posted the form to get a knighthood on a WhatsApp group of Tory MPs.
Well, they should
then immediately delete
the government should charge him for a knighthood, like they charge for peerages. Or the party should. The party
did. They already do. They always have, haven't they? Cash for honours.
I think that was more Lloyd George's.
No, I mean, it's a totally different area.
I think it's happened since.
Yes, look at the number of people in the House of Lords who clearly bought their peerages through party donations. And if they want to hold me before the bar of the House of Lords and punish me, then fine.
Well, I don't think you've made any specific allegations. I mean, Robbie Moore, when you look around your own benches and the benches opposite, now you've only been in Parliament, I think, since 2019.
19, yeah.
But do you sometimes despair at the things that some of your colleagues come out with?
I think no matter what political party that you're associated with, we need to make sure that we've got good people getting involved in politics, that are bringing a new skill set to the table. I think far too often you have polished politicians working their way up through the ladder to eventually become an MP. And I think actually going back to the 2019 election, which is from my intake, I think we saw a huge amount of new skill sets on our benches on the Conservative Party coming through that had never had anything to do with politics prior to entering Parliament. And I think that's healthy, actually, that we're trying to get to a position where we're representing all corners of geographically, but all different skill sets are coming through the system. And I suspect that's some of the challenges actually about how do we continue to keep people engaged in politics with the next general election coming up, because it's a 7-day-a-week job. You are in the public domain, you are scrutinised heavily, no matter what you do. And when you think, we've talked about pay, and you think that the chief executive of Bradford Council, which is my local authority, is getting paid far, far more significant than what the Prime Minister is, but yet hasn't got that level of scrutiny attached to it, I think sometimes there does need to be an open conversation that is associated with that.
There are other factors here as well. I mean, it's an insecure job, so, by definition, politician, you may lose your seat at the next election.
Don't remind Robbie of this. It's very
high
cool
risk.
of you.
It's high risk, low reward financially.
And these days, it's actually quite hard. People who have been MPs, you will find after December, probably, because Keighley's a marginal seat. It's very hard to find jobs later on, because employers think, yeah, but he'll be going back into politics in a year or two. We won't get any loyalty out of him. Now, and that is unfortunate. Employers are not very sympathetic to would-be politicians or has-been politicians, which I think we need to change the culture there.
There's nothing so X as an ex-MP.
Yeah.
But it's also true of people going into politics.
Or PM.
Well,
No,
Rachel, since you brought that up...
No, I'm not. No,
I was thinking more
too soon, Iain.
Is it?
But I mean, David Cameron is the exception to that rule,
Yes.
isn't he?
But there are other people who clearly want to come back as PM, aren't there? I mean, there's a whole queue of them, actually.
I'm not just scratching my head here, Michael.
Well, Liz Truss, for instance.
I think we've got 7. How many former living Tory MPs are there? Is it 7? PMs.
I don't know.
Quickly,
Major Cameron.
Brown, Cameron.
No, Brown's not
This is a
Tory.
very boring
Anyway,
politics
okay,
on
great.
radio.
Digress.
Right, we have digressed, which means we need to move on to the next question, and we'll do that in just a couple of minutes' time. It's 16 minutes past 8.
LBC.
It's amazing.
Michael's in the middle of an anecdote, which I think had better stop right now. Michael Crick is here with us answering your questions. Rachel Johnson, Barry Gardiner and Robbie Moore, who's a Conservative Environment Minister and MP for Keighley. We've kind of plugged your podcast already, Rachel, but let's do it again, shall we?
Go on then.
Why should all the listeners to Cross Question listen to your podcast?
Because you will have an amazing encounter with an incredible woman who's had to be very difficult in order to shape the way we live today. I mean, from somebody who's, tomorrow, for example, I'm interviewing Tanya Ednan Laperouse, whose daughter died on a BA flight having eaten a baguette that had sesame seed in it. The sesame seed was not listed on the ingredients. Her daughter had a violent allergy to sesame, died on the flight, and as a result of that, Tanya Laperouse has changed the law about labelling. I mean, that's just a sad example, but I mean, we interview so many people. I mean, Jilly Cooper, and I know you're going to enjoy this one. Jilly Cooper's in the launch lineup, and the Duchess of Rutland, as you know, Iain, she's the chatelaine of Belvoir Castle, and it's not funny. It's Belvoir.
You just have to mention that word and it makes you laugh, doesn't it?
And she's given an absolutely rip-roaring interview with me in which she describes living the ghosts at Belvoir, and then she reads my aura. I mean, what more could you want?
Can I just say, in my youth, I once had a badge that said, "Save a tree, eat a beaver." Now, that's a fact that you would never have expected of me, Iain, isn't it?
Barry.
I expect many things of you, Barry, but
is it post-watershed for that sort of thing?
It isn't. Right. You didn't even manage to mention the name of the podcast in that.
Oh, yeah, it's called Difficult Women. It's on Global Player.
And
Please.
It's very good.
Thank you.
And at 8:30, each of our three other panellists are going to suggest a guest that Rachel should interview on her Difficult Women podcast. Right, we're going to talk about something that Barry's involved in, but a little later in the programme as well. Right, next caller is Hassan in Kensington. Hassan, hi.
Hello, hi. Has Keir Starmer lost the Muslim vote for the Labour Party? And what concrete steps does he need to take to recover those voters?
Now, Labour is reportedly polling British Muslims over concerns that it's lost a significant number of Muslims who usually vote Labour because of its stance on Gaza. Now, this happened, if you think back to the Iraq War, a lot of the Muslim vote in 2005 went to the Liberal Democrats. I think did they get their record number of seats in 2005? I think
that's right, yes, because it actually went down in 2010, even though they came into government.
I mean, Hassan, I'm going to ask, are you a Muslim and has he lost your vote?
Yes, I'm a Muslim and he has definitely lost my vote. And I think 83% of the Muslim community voted for Labour in 2019. I campaigned up and down in various constituencies for Labour because I was in a safe Labour seat. But I'm not going to do that unless there's a radical change. And even then, it's very unlikely.
Michael Crick, let's come to you first on this. And how important is the Muslim vote to Labour, or does it? It obviously depends on the seat, but there are some seats where if 50% of the Muslim vote defected, they would lose.
Yeah, I think there are about 2 million, I think, Muslim voters in this country, and a lot of them are in marginal seats. Places like the Pennines, where there are quite a few seats that Labour is hoping to win back from the Conservative
seats like Keighley.
Indeed. Robbie's constituency. I think one of the problems here is that Labour, because of what happened in the Corbyn years and the perception that Labour had become anti-Semitic, that Labour under Starmer have bent over backwards to show they're not anti-Semitic, and therefore they have ended up being more pro-Israel in the last few months than they might otherwise have been, and that inevitably has alienated lots of Muslim voters. Now, it's interesting because, of course, the problem was before that Labour under Corbyn had alienated a lot of Jewish voters. But there are a lot fewer Jewish voters in this country, only about a third of a million, isn't it, Barry? No. And they tend to be, I mean, there's a tiny number of seats where the Jewish vote matters, but so it's either way. If they were to start saying, okay, well, we'll listen to these opinion polls and focus groups, and we'll sort of soften our position or harden our position depending on our point of view on Israel. The trouble is they're just going to look like what they are, a bunch of opportunists who just float this way or other, depending on what the focus groups and the opinion polls say. I mean, most Muslim voters will stick with Labour, I think, but inevitably they're going to lose some, and I don't think there's much now they can do to get them back.
Barry, you represent Brent North. I don't know what percentage of your constituents are Muslim, but is this a concern for you?
Look, I hate vote bank politics. I think Michael's analysis is broadly correct. But I really hate the fact that some people think that because you are of this religion, you ought to vote in this particular way. And we see far too much of it. Hassan, look, you probably know I have disagreed with my leader over a number of issues around Gaza, in particular over a ceasefire. I was one of those who voted in that vote for the ceasefire. I do think it's important that the Labour position should be observant of international law. It should respect human rights, and it should be based on principle. And what I fear in our politics is that we get to a situation where people are thinking, I need to take a stance because that helps me with this particular demographic group. Let's just vote on the principles that we have. And Hassan, look, I understand why you and many people are angry about the situation and feel betrayed by the Labour Party as well as by the Conservative government on this. But a general election is about a great many things, not just one issue. And sometimes, people want to say this issue is so important to me that I'm going to use my vote to make that impact. But what I do hope is that in doing so, people don't allow a worse government to come in, or indeed in any particular situation, a worse MP to come in. So I would say vote.
You see,
vote
Hassan's
for
in
the
Kensington, which is now a marginal seat. It was a Labour seat. It then went Tory in 2019, but they will certainly be hoping to win that back again. And if there are many more Hassans in Kensington taking the stance that he's taking, that could be a seat that you don't win.
Well, yeah, but what we have to do is we have to operate in politics according to our principles, not according to what we think is electorally advantageous. Because people will respect us if we act in accordance with our principles. They won't respect you if they think, well, actually, they'll say one thing Monday and another thing the next, in order simply to curry favour with the electorate. It's got to be, this is, when I responded to people who'd written to me on this, I sent out exactly the same letter, whether they had written to me from the Jewish community or from the Muslim community, and I made that clear. But what I started off with was saying, here are the principles by which I will judge the situation and by which I will act. I didn't start off by saying, I support this side or I support that side. And so many people want politicians to say, you've got to be on my side. No, we've actually got to set out the principles upon which we behave, upon which we act, and upon which we take policy decisions.
Well, I think that it's almost irrelevant whether Labour changes its position on what's going on in the Middle East functionally in terms of what happens in the Middle East. It makes a difference to how many Muslims are going to vote for Labour. If you're looking at one particular constituency, Kensington, and I think it's called Bayswater now.
Is it?
It's been redrawn. That's a marginal Labour-Tory seat. So if Hassan isn't going to vote for Emma Dent Code or whoever the Labour candidate is, she's an independent now, Joe Powell, is he going to vote for Elizabeth Buchan? Do you see? So where does the vote go? This is a completely internal...
Well, he probably votes Liberal Democrat.
Well,
not at
does
all.
he? I doubt it. I don't think so. This is just an internal conversation, and we all know that Keir Starmer's not going to do anything to skid as he walks across the floor carrying the Ming vase. So that's where we are. This is about Labour not wanting to lose, accepting that they will lose a small percentage, I would imagine, of the Muslim vote as a result of their decision to back
Hassan,
what Israel's doing.
If you're not going to vote Labour, who will you back?
I will back the Greens. I have a lot of respect for Barry and his principled position, but that is not the position of his leader, and that's why I think as a matter of principle, I cannot vote for the Labour Party.
Okay.
There's another problem for Labour here, and that is that the Labour Party has got rather lazy in a lot of seats and has become reliant on, leaders of the Muslim community to get the vote out. And they're very successful at that, and sometimes that's had unfortunate consequences, as we've seen in vote fraud cases in Birmingham and in Tower Hamlets, and so we've seen how Labour have lost certain leading Muslim councillors in the last few weeks, and other figures have left the party altogether over this. So it's not a simple matter of individuals making a choice. It's a matter of also of these powerful figures influencing much wider groups to perhaps desert the party.
I know it is. I've got to get Robbie involved in this as well, and then we need to go to the news.
So I think there's two points I want to make. One, I think for far too long, actually, Labour have taken the Muslim vote for granted and not absolutely focused, and that actually picks up on the point that you've just been making. So that vote, I think, has been taken for granted for far too long. Second point is Labour are all over the place on this issue. In my seat, you have seen independents now wanting to stand to take that Labour vote. You have seen Labour councillors resign from Bradford Council to become independent. And we have seen within Parliament Labour MPs resign from the shadow cabinet to take a backbench position on the Labour benches. And when we are dealing with such an important issue like what is going on in the Middle East, and you have a party like Labour that are wanting to be in government and they can't get a solidified position on such an important issue, I think that rings alarm bells actually for something that is going to continue to be such an important issue beyond the general election, whether that takes place whatever point in this year. So you have a party that were wanting to get into government. They are all over the place on this issue, and yet you have a vote base, which we know, looking at the 2019 results, about 80%-ish of predominantly Muslim voters voted Labour, where Labour have been relying on that vote base for far too long. And really, when I represent Keighley, and I'm proud to represent a strong, predominantly Muslim community, predominantly Pakistani Kashmiri community, and I have to really question, what has Labour been delivering for that particular community for a significant amount of time? I would question that.
I'm sure
What's
Barry...
your position on the ceasefire then?
Well, quite rightly, we want to achieve a sustainable ceasefire position.
Right. Now, while you listen to the news, three of our panel are going to suggest guests for Rachel Johnson's brilliant podcast, Difficult Women. It's 8:33 News Headlines with Tim Daly.
A 44-year-old man has been charged with 2 counts of murder after the weekend stabbing of 2 teenagers in Bristol. Anthony Snook will go before magistrates in the city tomorrow morning. The European Union is to carefully consider a deal which will remove post-trade Brexit checks between Britain and Northern Ireland. MPs will also scrutinise what's been agreed between the DUP and Westminster tomorrow. And the United States has destroyed a missile the Houthis were reportedly preparing to launch from Yemen. Officials say it presented an imminent threat to American aircraft. LBC weather, rain moving southwards across the south of England and Wales overnight, with blustery showers in the far north and an overnight low of freezing.
This is LBC.
not.
Now, very briefly, 3 of our panellists are going to recommend guests for Rachel Johnson's Difficult Women podcast. Barry, who would you like to recommend?
I'd suggest Shruti Vadera, one of the sort of... she was the great brain that Gordon Brown relied on, but has subsequently become president of Santander Bank, or one of the international banks. And
is she a baroness?
Yes, she is. Baroness Shruti Vadera.
She is a baroness.
But I remember her coming into a meeting in the DTI late. And she hadn't seen the paperwork that we were all given about the projections and the trade projections and the economy. And she just went flip, 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 flip. This is rubbish. And she was right. And literally in seconds, she had analysed this and just tore it apart.
She is a scary woman because her brain
her
brain is even bigger than David Willetts' 2 brains put together.
Yes, absolutely.
Michael Crick.
Well, I'm going to nominate a woman who is standing for Parliament for the Liberal Democrats called Ros Savage. And she is in the Guinness Book of Records because she is the first woman to have rowed solo across 3 oceans. And they're not any old oceans, they're serious oceans.
I'm taking
Pacific,
notes. Yeah.
Atlantic and Indian.
Yeah.
And she's a big environment. I've never met her, but she. I just think it's an extraordinary achievement.
For a Liberal Democrat, indeed. Robbie.
Well, I'm going to a fellow parliamentarian, Kate Rock. I don't know if you've come across her. Sits in the Baroness Rock, sits in the House of Lords. Has done a huge amount of work for tenant farmers in wanting to get some reform associated with security of tenure. And I think she would be really interesting to get on your programme because she's done some great work in that area and can bring some practical experience as well from her own family farming network as well.
I think I'll bid for all of that. I think I was
bottle
maybe
of champagne on the way to
with
all
that.
of you if she actually books your guests, I imagine, because Rachel's generous like that. Now, a text question from Carol who says, with the start of next Brexit border checks and vet certificates for meat imports, whatever happened to Brexit promises of sunlit uplands? With vet shortages, no certificate will mean no imports. Today is the 4th anniversary of Britain leaving the EU. Going terribly well, isn't it, Robbie?
Well, we have to recognise that there's been absolutely challenges associated with a huge, substantial change with us moving out of the European Union, but we are addressing those, and I feel that we are delivering on some of the key things that we wanted to establish, like we've brought out the Immigration Act, which gives us the ability to stipulate through a points-based system who we want to be coming into this country and set that requirement based on the skills that we need to be developing.
But you're a minister in DEFRA. You've clearly failed to get new arrangements for vet certificates sorted out in time.
And I know that that's being looked at the moment. So that's
why wasn't it looked
an active
at
thing that
6
the
months
department
ago,
is,
so we wouldn't have
looking
the
at.
situation?
And we're working. We are alive to that issue, and we are working through it to try and provide that reassurance to that sector. But I want to just reiterate some of the huge steps I think that we have made on the back of coming out of the European Union, not only with some of our immigration policies, with giving us much more control in terms of our border. We recognise the challenges with the illegal
migration. Well, that's going well, isn't it, with all the illegal migration?
But it's giving us the ability to have that control and make those decisions.
If you don't implement that control, what's the point of having the ability?
Well, if we were still within the European Union, it would be freedom of movement, and we would not even be able to have the ability to set
those controls. If we were still in the European Union, we would still be in the Dublin Agreement, and these people could be returned to France.
But we would still have the challenges associated with illegal migration. And by being outside of the European Union, we can take a much tougher stance than what we would have been able to have done with.
See, this is a problem for people like me who voted for Brexit, still believe that Brexit was a good idea, but it's been completely mucked up by a group of incompetent politicians and civil servants in government who have failed in their mission to free up regulations which should have been gone by now, and they're not. You've had 4 years to do it. Why on earth are we still talking about abolishing regulations, the European regulations, which should have been abolished within a year of us leaving the European Union?
And we have made good strides in reducing the amount of red tape and the regulation, which is saving businesses about £1 billion predicted per annum. So that's a good step in the right direction. We were also able to negotiate our own trade arrangements, which with trade agreements that are rolling out that we would not have been able to do had we been in the European Union. These are all positive steps. We've come out of the common agricultural policy. We're able to design our own transitional arrangements in terms of how we are subsidising.
But you know full well that most farmers, and certainly the National Farmers Union, are really unhappy with what you're doing on that.
But I have to make the point, though, the transition is definitely in the right direction. Having been looped under a common agricultural policy, where we're paying a set payment to a landowner based on how much land they farm, leads to lack of innovation within the sector. So moving towards a system which is paying public money for public good, we are able to set the requirements, whether it's agri-environmental benefit or if it's innovation or if it's more precision farming measures that we're wanting to implement. That is a step in the right direction.
Okay. Stop banging the table. It goes straight through the microphone. Rachel.
How well is Brexit going? We are marking it out of 10.
Well, you saw the question. You heard the question.
What happened to the sunlit uplands? Well, I mean, I think Shriti Vadera would have seen through vote leave in a heartbeat, and she would have said, "This is ridiculous. Why are we throwing up trade barriers?" The New York Times, the one thing that you're pointing to, Robbie, is that we have the ability to control immigration. The New York Times, in a recent article, said that the only positive legacy of Brexit, tangible early legacy, is it has come as a shock to people who voted to leave to make the country's borders less porous, is that immigration is replenishing Britain's labour force and deepening the diversity of its cities. That's been the legacy of Brexit as far as the New York Times is concerned. In terms of the new checks...
well-known pro-British paper.
Of course, but in terms of the import checks, this is really quite Kafkaesque. I know we have to do it because we check theirs or they check ours and it's reciprocal. But we've gone from a situation where we had no tariffs and tariff-free access to the single market to a situation where we are paying, £330 million a year. That's not counting all the companies that are going to go out of business as a result of the fact there aren't vets and they can't actually do the admin and the red tape because it adds so much to cost. It's going to add 0.2 to annual inflation as well, where we've recreated a system where we're just recreating the bureaucracy so we can trade with the single market. It's completely nuts. We're paying money and adding administrative burden
with America
to our companies that used to trade freely in order to get back to where we were before we left.
Okay, Barry?
Look, I think it was interesting. Robbie was particularly picking out vets, and you challenged him. You said, well, why wasn't this done months before? Well, actually, Robbie was on the committee with me, on the Environment Committee, when we said this. But the government didn't do it. Now, Robbie's in the invidious position of having voted for the report that we had in the EFRA committee that pointed out that this was going to be a problem. And then, of course, being landed up as the minister who then has the problem on his desk. But, Robbie, you talked about Brexit being a success in terms of migration controls. Well, actually, we've had, in the past 13 years, 6 million extra people come into this country. That's the figures that came out this morning. If you go to the 13 years under Labour, it was 4 million. So you've a 50% rise in the migration that's come in. Now,
of which a proportion of that time we were within the European Union, Barry.
An aging population, okay, means that we are demanding people to look after our aging population. That's why there's been a 165% rise in the people who've come in to do social care and healthcare work, because we haven't trained nurses, we haven't trained doctors, we haven't trained the people who come in as the care workers, we haven't actually incentivized them enough, we haven't paid them enough to want to go into those jobs. But there's a fundamental lack of appreciation over the past 13 years of the need to be training our own people, our young
You're
people,
going
to do the job.
way off the question here, which was about Brexit border checks.
Well,
so I'm going to go to Michael.
Can you remind me what the question was? I was going to say all
with
sorts
the
of things
start
about...
of new Brexit border checks and vet certification for meat imports, whatever happened to Brexit promises of sunlit uplands?
Well, the sunlit uplands, if they're there at all, are extremely distant. I mean, what worries me is the fundamentals as to why the European Union, or the common market as it was originally, was created. It was to create a sense of unity in Europe and the feeling that if everybody traded with each other, that they would not fight wars against each other. And we joined the common market in 1973 with those sort of ideals in mind. Now, we're now in a situation where Europe is in deep trouble. We've got a strong possibility of a Trump presidency from next January. And it may not just be 4 years. You may well be a whole series of other Trumpite, much more isolationist, much more anti-European American presidents after that. Europe needs much more unity right now in the face of Russian aggression, and Britain used to be in a position where it might have provided a certain amount of backbone and leadership with regard to that, and particularly might well do so right now in the face of the threats from Ukraine. And so that's why if I had the ability to press a button and reverse what happened in 2016, I would happily do so. But it may well be that in 25, 30, 50 years' time I'm proved wrong and it was a good idea, but it isn't looking like that at the moment.
Well, I was in Berlin a couple of weeks ago, a food and agriculture forum, international conference, speaking with the Minister for Agriculture for Ukraine, who singled out the UK for going above and beyond at early speed, not only with the military or humanitarian support, but actually from an agriculture and food security position, singled us out above all other countries in the room, many of whom were European, in us going and above and beyond, not only through providing that support through recovery, but securing those channels to get the Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. And we've only been able to do that in terms of taking that leadership role, going above and beyond, because we had the ability and the flexibility to do that.
If I could play Jerusalem, I would do so right now, but I can't. It's 8:48.
This is LBC.
Robbie Moore, Conservative Environment Minister and MP for Keighley, is with us, as is journalist Michael Crick, LBC presenter Rachel Johnson, and Barry Gardiner. Now, here's a sentence I never thought I'd say. What's this documentary you've got coming out on Monday, Barry?
It's about the problems that leasehold flat owners are experiencing, particularly post-Grenfell and the government's Building Safety Act, which was supposed to solve those problems. People find that they're trapped in their own homes. They can't sell. They can't get the EWS1 form. That's the external wall safety form that they need to get a mortgage, so nobody will buy their property. And we're talking 5 million people in this country who are leaseholders, 4.5 million probably who are leaseholder flat owners. And it is just a huge scandal because they can't control what's happening in their property. Their insurance premiums have just gone skyrocketing. There was a case just before Christmas where the Canary Riverside case that went to the tribunal, where it was found that their managing agent took £1.6 million in illegal kickbacks from the insurance company for arranging that insurance. That's money that they are paying. They have no control over their block. They have no control. And what we need is to scrap. And actually, the government's accepted that we need to scrap leasehold system and move to a common hold system for apartment blocks. The rest of the world's done it. America's condominiums, the Australia has strata title. No other country in the world has. So
what's the documentary called? Mr. Gardiner Against the Landlord versus the Landlord?
No, it's just called Leasehold.
And where can people see it?
They'll be able to see it from Monday on my website, or it'll be at leaseholddoc.com.
Right. I'll put it on my Twitter feed as well.
Thank you.
Right. The next question comes from Lynn, who says, I think Nicola Sturgeon must have a very good drama coach. She's gone from a strident, I will give you a good kicking if you disagree with me attitude to adopting a weepy little girl's voice and crying unless you go easy on me and treat me gently. Do any of you use drama training? How do you deal with emotion from others which is being used to deflect and pull the wool over people's eyes? Now, the Scottish COVID Bereaved Families for Justice campaign accused Nicola Sturgeon of crying crocodile tears today. Rachel.
Well, I'm slightly with the COVID Bereaved Families campaign, but as I want Nicola Sturgeon to do my podcast, I'm not going to be too rude about her performance today. I mean, uncharitably, I would say that it was a performance and it revealed a lot about how the Scottish government ran COVID that we didn't know, and they put on a jolly good front.
At least they didn't have parties, eh?
Charitably, I would say that imagine you are First Minister, imagine you are Prime Minister during a pandemic, a novel coronavirus, the first in 100 years. Think what it's like trying to keep your own family safe. Imagine the burden and responsibility of having to keep the entire country safe. So however badly she performed, but in front of the cameras or behind the scenes on WhatsApp, ditto my own dear brother, I think we have to owe it to them to recognise they were put in an impossible position, and on the whole, they did their best.
But do you genuinely believe that was an act?
Yes.
Because I don't.
I don't know. I don't know. I think she's had a rough ride recently, is what I think. And I think she came across as very raw.
That's why I don't think it was put on. I think it was genuine emotion.
Behind the scenes, they were saying, they were WhatsApping each other saying, I'm winging it, this is all so random. And you realise that everybody was busking it. Yeah.
Okay. Robbie.
Well, I mean, the COVID inquiry is incredibly important, and we'll see how it develops. But I think one of the things that worries me from what I have seen within the media is the way in which the SNP tried to, in terms of politicise, I feel, the way in which their announcements were done reference to the UK government at the time. And I think
But her response to that was, What? Me? Moi?
Yeah.
You
think
said you
I
thought
would
she
do
was
that?
genuine.
No, I think the emotion was genuine, but I think some of the other stuff was.
And that's incredibly worrying, isn't it? Because if I think, as has been said, is a very, very difficult time. You have to give everyone, assume everyone was doing the right thing by the right advice that they were given. But I think what we've seen come out through the media, through WhatsApp exchange, there was definitely an agenda, from my interpretation of it, that the SNP were trying to politicise and for their own gain, into wanting to make sure that they were seen to be leading the case. And you saw that even down to the timings of when some of the announcements were made relative to the UK government.
Okay. Michael?
Well, I can't think of a politician in this country who has fallen as rapidly as Nicola Sturgeon has done in the last 12 months. I mean, 12 months ago, a bit more, she was widely admired, even among people who do not believe in at all in a million years in Scottish independence. People of all parties said that, she had abilities beyond any other politician of her age. And now her reputation has just plummeted in the last 12 months for various different reasons, which we've got to be careful about what we say here. And maybe the tears were something to do with that, maybe, but also, the memories of what was a difficult time for her as First Minister, and difficult decisions she had to make that did affect people's lives. But I don't think it was put on. I mean, I really don't. It's very difficult, I would have thought, to do that unless you're a professional actor.
Barry?
The chap who used to stand behind you holding your wreath of laurels as you went on your chariot into Rome.
Where's this
in celebration.
When was that, Barry?
Used to be told to whisper in the champion's ear, "Remember thou art mortal."
Yeah.
Yes.
And today, I think what we saw is Nicola Sturgeon remembering that she is mortal. I believe it wasn't an act. I agree with Michael. I think it was a very human reaction to the distance that she has fallen in public esteem. And I've not agreed with her on any policies, or not on many anyway. And but I felt very sorry for her, just at a human level. And I think in politics we do have to try to be kinder. You, Rachel, sort of referred to your brother. At least she had the grace to try.
Not to.
No.
Yeah, no, but when he was before the inquiry, he was pugilistic.
Didn't think so. I mean, I read.
Well, he had a moment, didn't he?
Yes. I just thought that it was a very human moment. She cried, and there was clearly, to me.
But you didn't think it was a human moment when Boris Johnson cried? Or
he
had a
didn't
moment?
cry.
No, he didn't cry.
Yes.
Well, she didn't cry, to be fair. She choked up
she
just
cheered,
as he did.
Yeah. Okay.
But you judge him differently.
No, I think that you're right. At that point, I was thinking of when he'd been more aggressive in his responses. But you're right, he did have that choking moment.
Well, you'll have a chance to put your views on both Nicola Sturgeon and other politicians, and indeed celebrities who cry in public, because I think that we have a double standard here about men and women crying in politics. With women, it's seen as a bit weak, whereas we praise men who do it for showing their human side. So I want to know, when was the last time you cried in public? That's coming up after 9 o'clock. Now, our final question from Tammy in Portsmouth. Adele has announced what she calls a random residency at a specially built stadium in Munich, of all places, while Robbie Williams has been linked with buying lower league football club Port Vale. What's the most random place you've spotted a famous person in? Rachel?
I'm afraid I can't think of anything very good, but I did see Prue Leith as I was leaving Westminster today, and of course she was going to have breakfast or lunch with her son Danny Kruger MP, so that's not really random enough, but it was quite a surprise to see her, and she looked fantastic.
Robbie?
Crikey, I don't know if I'm mixing the circles. I'm seeing that many famous people, if I'm honest. So I completely draw a blank. Come back to me. Give me 2 seconds.
Honestly, you've had 10 minutes to prepare for that. Michael?
I was in the grubby BBC cafe once and queuing behind this elderly gentleman who ordered a cup of tea in a styrofoam cup, and he turned around and said, "Oh, how are you?" and all of this as if he knew me, and I said, can't work out who it was. And I didn't carry on. I was embarrassed, so I didn't carry on the conversation. And gosh, I wish I had done, because I then realised 5 minutes later it was Norman Wisdom.
No.
Oh, no.
Mr. Grimsdale. Barry?
It was the vegetable garden at Kew. But it was also, I think, 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and it was during the 2017 election campaign, and I'd taken the afternoon just to try and chill out. And my wife was with me, and she said, "Isn't that John McDonnell over there?" And I said, "Don't be so stupid." And we rounded by the broccoli or whatever it was, and lo and behold, it was John McDonnell. So we started chatting there, and I thought, oh my God, if a reporter should see us now, they'd say that there was the vegetable plot.
We now know why Labour lost the 2017 election, because you two were skiving.
Well, Corbyn would have approved. He's into
He
all
would,
that
yes,
sort of thing.
absolutely.
Well, my only contribution to this is last Thursday I was having lunch at my favourite restaurant, the Delaunay. I'm sure you've
I love the Delaunay.
it's a fantastic restaurant. Should I say who I was having lunch with?
Yes,
I was having lunch with Liz Truss. And don't look so surprised. I was quite surprised too. And then at the next table, I looked up, and it was Sir David Attenborough. Now, I'm not sure that's particularly random, but you always see a celebrity when you go to the Delaunay. Right, that brings us to the end of tonight's Cross Question. On Monday, we'll be joined by the Liberal Democrats Foreign Affairs spokesperson Layla Moran, the Conservative MP Tim Lawton, the broadcaster Liz Kershaw, she's always quite controversial, and the author and podcaster Steve Richards. So do join us for that. Coming up in the next hour, as I say, we are going to turn to the subject of crying, and I'm going to ask, has our attitude towards people crying in public softened, or is it still viewed as a sign of weakness? Now, as you know, if you've been listening to this programme over the last 14 years, I've had the odd moment on the programme where I've choked up, and I used to feel quite embarrassed about it, because there's nothing you can do. You get that little sort of frog in your throat and you just can't speak. But I've worked out that if I'm doing it, so are quite a lot of the audience, and I've never had anyone criticise me for doing it, but people do criticise well-known people who cry or get emotional in public. Why? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a 44-year-old man has been charged with 2 counts of murder after the weekend stabbing of 2 teenagers in Bristol. 5 people are still being held for questioning after the death of 15-year-old Mason Rist and Max Dixon, who was 16. Superintendent Mark Runacres from the Avon and Somerset Police has been giving an update in the last hour.
The Crown Prosecution Service has authorised us to charge one of those arrested with 2 counts of murder, following a review of the evidence collated. 44-year-old Anthony Snook will remain in police custody overnight before appearing at Bristol Magistrates Court tomorrow morning.
Officials in the US say they've destroyed a missile the Houthis were reportedly preparing to launch from Yemen. They say it was taken out because it presented an imminent threat to American aircraft. Ministers say the government's deal with the DUP on post-Brexit trading is the right one. The agreement scraps routine checks on goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Former Conservative Brexit Secretary David Davis has told LBC this has been a long time coming.
Theresa May had promised there will be full alignment, that was the phrase, between Northern and Southern Ireland. What's been going on from then until now is a struggle to make that work without destroying